Mist hangs low over the Lancaster County fields. The first gray light of morning seeps across the corn rows like a slow spill. A rooster calls from somewhere near the barn, thin and lonely in the cold air. Inside the farmhouse kitchen, Hannah Baylor Yoder stands at the counter measuring coffee grounds into the percolator. She is 20 years old. Her face is pale and unlined, but her eyes carry a weight that does not belong to someone so young. Dark circles beneath them tell stories she does not speak aloud. She pauses mid-motion. One hand drifts to her stomach, pressing flat against the apron. Her eyes close. Upstairs, heavy footsteps cross the wooden floor. Floorboards creak directly above her head. She flinches. Her eyes snap open. She reaches for the coffee pot, fills it with water, sets it on the stove. Her movements are precise and practiced. The movements of a woman who has learned exactly where everything belongs and knows with absolute certainty that nothing here belongs to her. The footsteps descend the stairs. Each creak is deliberate, heavy with the weight of a large man carrying his own burdens. Jacob Yoder enters the kitchen. He is 44 years old, broad-shouldered and thick-armed from 30 years of farm labor. His dark beard is streaked with gray. Deep lines bracket his mouth. He wears the plain broadfall trousers and suspenders of the old order. He is a good man, a hardworking man, a man the community respects without question. He stops at the threshold and watches his wife's back with something that might be regret or might be simple uncertainty. He has not touched her except by accident in the 8 months since the bishop bound them together before God and the congregation. He does not know how to reach this girl who shares his bed but not his life. He is not certain he should try. He tells her she was awake again last night. The words hang in the air between them. Hannah does not turn around. She says she slept fine, her voice flat and controlled, the voice of a woman who has learned to bury everything she feels beneath layers of practical necessity. He tells her the bed was cold, that she was downstairs. She says she needed water. He asks if it took 3 hours, and now his voice is softer, less accusation than something approaching genuine concern. She turns to face him then, setting the coffee cup on the table, and her face is composed in that careful way she has learned to make her face blank when her feelings are too large and dangerous to contain. She is not his enemy, he tells her, and the words sound clumsy and inadequate even to his own ears. The children will be hungry, she says. She should start the eggs. She turns back to the stove. Jacob takes his hat from the hook by the door. The screen door opens and closes with a bang. His boots sound on the wooden porch, then fade into the morning. Hannah grips the edge of the counter. Her knuckles go white. She breathes in through her nose and out through her mouth. A single tear tracks down her cheek. She wipes it away before it can fall and stain anything. In the barn, Jacob stands in the doorway looking back at the house. His eldest son Eli approaches from the milking stalls. At 16, Eli has his father's broad shoulders and his dead mother's gentle, watchful eyes. He has grown old before his time, a boy forced into the shape of a man by grief and duty and the endless work of a dairy farm. He watches his father watching the house and understands things he does not say aloud. He picks up a pitchfork and begins moving hay in steady, rhythmic motions. The sound fills the barn like a heartbeat. Jacob joins him, taking up his own fork, and they work together in the heavy silence of men who do not know how to speak what they feel. Eli breaks the silence first. He says she is trying, the words careful and measured, tested before release. Jacob says nothing. Eli continues, saying she has been here 8 months now, that she is younger than his own parents were when they married. Jacob's hands tighten on the wooden handle. His voice comes out rough and defensive. His first wife has nothing to do with this. Eli stops working and turns to face his father fully. Everything in this house has to do with her, he says, and the words are not cruel, only honest, only the truth that everyone in this family has been dancing around since the funeral. Jacob's jaw tightens. He asks if Eli thinks he wanted this, if Eli thinks he wanted to bury his wife and then bring a strange girl into her kitchen. The bishop said it was right. The community needed it settled. The children needed a mother. Eli's voice cracks when he answers. They needed time to grieve, he says. Jacob thrusts the pitchfork deep into the hay and tells his son that grief is a luxury for the living, that work is what remains. He walks deeper into the barn, disappearing into the shadows between the hay bales. Eli stands alone, the pitchfork loose in his hands, his young face etched with sorrow too heavy for his 16 years. Back in the kitchen, Hannah sets the table for breakfast. 8 places. Each plate is precisely centered. Each fork is exactly 1 inch from the plate's edge. She has learned these measurements from watching, from trial and error, from Martha's sharp corrections delivered with the casual cruelty only a grieving 14-year-old girl can muster. Martha enters now with the younger children. Katie is 6, Joseph is 4. They are clean scrubbed and solemn, dressed in the plain clothing the ordnung requires. Katie's hair is pulled back so tightly it must hurt, the work of Martha's impatient hands. Joseph's suspenders are twisted, and Hannah kneels to straighten them. The boy does not look at her. He submits to her hands with the terrible stillness of a child who has learned not to expect tenderness from strangers. Katie offers a good morning, her voice rote and learned, the words of a child who has been told to be polite to the woman who has taken her mother's place. Hannah responds in kind, her voice soft and careful, and lifts Joseph onto his chair. The chair belonged to their mother. Everything in this house belonged to their mother. The quilts on the bed, stitched by Sarah Yoder's hands during long winter evenings. The flowers pressed in the family Bible, dried and fragile as old memories. The recipe box on the shelf, its cards yellowed and worn with use. Hannah has never opened that box. She cannot bring herself to touch it. Martha announces that the coffee is cold, her voice flat and accusatory. Hannah says she will warm it. Martha responds that her mother always made fresh coffee for breakfast, that her mother said reheated coffee was lazy. The words land like small stones thrown with precision. Hannah absorbs them without flinching. She has learned to absorb, to bend, to make herself small and unobtrusive. She says she will make fresh coffee and dumps the pot, starting again from the beginning. Her hands are steady now, performing rituals she has memorized from watching Sarah Yoder's daughters perform them. Rituals that will never truly be hers no matter how many times she repeats them. The morning meal passes in near silence. Jacob comes in from the barn and takes his place at the head of the table. They bow their heads for the silent prayer. Hannah watches the family through lowered lashes and sees that Katie has arranged her fork and spoon exactly as her mother used to do, that Joseph still leaves a small portion of his eggs uneaten the way children do when they are waiting for someone who will never return to finish them. Martha eats mechanically, her eyes fixed on her plate. Eli catches Hannah watching and holds her gaze for a moment. There is something in his expression that might be sympathy or might be simple recognition of another person trapped in circumstances they did not choose. Hannah looks away first. After breakfast, Hannah walks the younger children to the one-room schoolhouse down the lane. Other mothers are there delivering their own children. Some nod politely, some whisper behind their hands. Hannah has grown accustomed to the whispers. She knows what they say. She is too young for Jacob Yoder. She is an outsider, raised in a different district with slightly different ways. She does not know how to run a household the way Sarah did. She will never measure up to the woman who came before her. Ruth Stoltzfus approaches as the children file inside. Ruth is 35, mother to 7, with kind eyes and strong hands and a reputation for speaking truth even when truth is uncomfortable. Her hand brushes Hannah's elbow, light and brief. She asks how Hannah is holding up. Hannah gives the automatic answer. She is fine. Ruth does not accept this. She tells Hannah that it took 3 years before her own husband's house felt like home, and that was with a man she loved from the beginning. Hannah looks at her sharply, startled by such honesty. Ruth does not look away. She tells Hannah she is doing better than she knows. Hannah's voice breaks when she answers. She does not know anything anymore. Ruth squeezes her arm. A small kindness, offered freely and without condition. Hannah carries that kindness like a candle through the rest of her day, shielding its small flame from the wind. In the afternoon, Hannah sits with Martha in the living room, attempting sewing. Her stitches are crooked, the thread pulling too tight. Martha watches with barely concealed contempt and tells her she is pulling too tight, that the fabric will pucker. Hannah sets down the needle and asks Martha to show her. There is a pause. Martha did not expect this response. She expected defensiveness or tears or the cold silence that usually passes between them. She tells Hannah that her mother taught her when she was 6 that she could do it blindfolded. Her voice is sharp, but something trembles beneath it. Hannah tells her that her mother must have been a good teacher then and asks Martha to show her what her mother showed her. Martha hesitates. Something shifts in her face, some wall developing, the first hairline crack. She takes the needle. She demonstrates the proper tension, her voice softening as she explains. Gentle, she says, do not fight the fabric. You work with it, not against it. Their fingers brush when Hannah takes the needle back. Martha pulls away quickly, but the moment lingers in the air between them. Something has changed, however small, however tentative. Hannah feels it like the first drop of rain before a storm. That evening, Jacob sits across from Bishop Isaac Miller in the bishop's modest home. Isaac Miller is 70 years old, white-bearded, with eyes that have seen generations of sorrow and joy and everything in between. He has been bishop for 30 years and has buried 2 wives of his own. He knows something about grief and the strange shapes it takes. He pours coffee for Jacob and waits. The bishop tells Jacob that he has been married 8 months now, that the community watches. Jacob knows what the community watches. The bishop continues, saying there are concerns. Hannah is young, she was not raised in their district. People wonder if she is suited to the life she has been asked to lead. Jacob's voice is tight when he answers. She does her duty. The bishop sets down his coffee cup and leans forward. Duty is not a marriage, he says. Jacob's first wife, Sarah, she made his house a home. People remember what that looked like. Jacob's voice is rough with old grief when he says he remembers too. The bishop asks if this girl knows she is living in a grave. Jacob stands abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. He did not choose this marriage, he says. The elders came to him after Sarah's death. His children needed a mother. The farm needed a woman's hands. He did what was asked of him, what the community required. The bishop's voice is calm and implacable. What is asked and what is right are not always the same thing, he says. He tells Jacob to go home and look at his wife. Not Sarah's replacement, not a hired hand to cook and clean and tend the children. His wife. Jacob leaves without another word. He walks the long lane back to his farm in the gathering darkness, and the bishop's words walk beside him like an unwelcome companion. That night, Hannah lies in bed beside Jacob, listening to his breathing even out into sleep. The bedroom still holds traces of Sarah, her hope chest at the foot of the bed, her shawl hanging on a peg by the window. Hannah has not asked Jacob to remove these things. She does not feel she has the right. She stares at the ceiling and thinks about the life she imagined for herself when she was a girl. A young husband, someone her own age, a courtship with shy glances and buggy rides, a wedding she anticipated with joy rather than dread. None of that happened. Her parents spoke with the elders spoke with Jacob. Arrangements were made. She was given no choice, not really, not in any way that mattered. Obedience was her duty. Submission was her path to salvation. She got out of bed and went downstairs to stand in the dark kitchen, her hand pressed to her stomach, and wept silently for everything she had lost before she ever had a chance to hold it. The days that followed passed in the same gray rhythm. Hannah rose before dawn to start the coffee. She cooked and cleaned and tended the children. She endured Martha's sharp comments and Katie's silent distance and Joseph's refusal to let her comfort him when he cried in the night for his mother. She worked alongside Jacob in the garden, their hands sometimes brushing in the soil, neither acknowledging the contact. She attended church services and sat in the assigned pew for married women and felt the weight of the congregation's assessing gaze. She smiled when she was supposed to smile. She spoke when she was spoken to. She disappeared a little more each day into the shape of Sarah Yoder's empty dress. Then on a Thursday afternoon in late September, everything changed. Hannah was in the kitchen kneading bread dough. The windows were open to the autumn air. The younger children were at school. Martha was visiting a friend. Jacob and Eli were in the far fields harvesting the last of the corn. The house was quiet except for the rhythmic push and fold of dough beneath Hannah's palms. She heard the screen door open and close. She assumed it was Martha returning early. She called out a greeting without turning around. The woman who answered had Sarah Yoder's voice. Hannah's hands stopped moving. The dough sat forgotten on the counter. She turned slowly, flour dusting her apron in her hands, and saw a woman standing in the kitchen doorway. The woman was thin, terribly thin, her plain dress hanging loose on a frame that had once been sturdy. Her face was weathered and lined, older than her 39 years should have allowed. Her hair was covered with a traveling bonnet. Her eyes were the same gentle brown that Eli and Katie had inherited. She carried a small cloth bag. She looked at Hannah with a mixture of exhaustion and sorrow and something that might have been hope. She said her name was Sarah Yoder and she had come home. Hannah's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the kitchen floor, her floury hands leaving white prints on the wooden planks. Sarah rushed forward, dropping her bag, and knelt beside her. She was saying something, words tumbling out in a rush of explanation and apology, but Hannah could not hear any of it over the roaring in her ears. Sarah Yoder was dead. Sarah Yoder had drowned in the creek 2 years ago, swept away by the current during a flash flood. They had never found her body. There had been a funeral, A headstone in the cemetery. Jacob had worn black for a year. The children had wept for months. The community had brought casseroles and sympathy, and then, eventually, the elders had come with their talk of practical necessity and a new wife for the widower. But Sarah Yoder was not dead. She had been pulled from the creek by a truck driver who did not know the area, who had driven her to a hospital in Harrisburg. She had struck her head on a rock. She had no memory of who she was or where she came from. The hospital had called her Jane. She had spent months in a rehabilitation facility. She had worked in a laundry, in a kitchen, piecing together a life from fragments. And then, 3 weeks ago, the memories had started returning. Faces first. Then names. Then the image of a white farmhouse with a red barn and cornfields stretching to the horizon. She had used what little money she had saved to buy a bus ticket. She had walked the last 5 miles from the station. She had come home. Hannah listened to this story while sitting on the kitchen floor, and she understood immediately and completely that her life had just been split in two. The before and the after. The woman she had tried to become and the woman she would now have to be. She looked at Sarah's face and saw Martha's stubborn chin, Katie's delicate brow, Joseph's mouth. She saw everything she had been trying and failing to replace, alive and breathing and kneeling on the floor beside her. The sound of wagon wheels came from outside. Jacob and Eli returning from the fields. Hannah watched Sarah's face as she heard the familiar sounds. The recognition, the joy, the terror. Sarah rose on unsteady legs and walked to the screen door. She pushed it open and stepped onto the porch. Hannah followed, still covered in flour, still not quite believing what she was seeing. Jacob was climbing down from the wagon. He looked up and saw the woman on his porch. He stopped moving. His face went gray, then white, then crumpled into an expression Hannah had never seen on him before. He said Sarah's name like a prayer, like a wound reopening, like a man who has been drowning for 2 years and has just seen the surface of the water. Eli dropped the reins and stared. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Sarah walked down the porch steps toward her husband. She was weeping openly, her hands outstretched. Jacob caught her in his arms and held her like a man holding something he had lost and never expected to find. He buried his face in her hair and his shoulders shook with sobs. Eli ran to his mother and wrapped his arms around both of them. The three of them stood there in the dusty yard, clinging to each other, a family reunited from the impossible divide of death. Hannah watched from the porch, her hands hung at her sides. Flour dusted her apron and her hair. She was the outsider now, the intruder, the woman who had been keeping another woman's place warm. She turned and went back into the kitchen. She stood at the counter where she had stood every morning for 8 months. She looked at the coffee pot. She looked at the recipe box on the shelf. She reached up and for the first time opened it. The cards inside were written in Sarah's neat handwriting. Recipes for bread and preserves and pie crust. Instructions for running a household. Notes in the margins about Jacob's preferences, the children's favorites, the small details that made a house a home. Hannah closed the box gently. She untied her apron and laid it across the back of a chair. Then she went upstairs to the bedroom and began packing her few belongings into a small case. The reunion in the yard went on for a long time. Martha came home and screamed with joy and threw herself into her mother's arms. The younger children were fetched from school. Katie sobbed and would not let go of Sarah's hand. Joseph buried his face in his mother's neck and made small animal sounds of happiness and relief. The family gathered in the living room, Sarah at the center, telling her story again while her children touched her face and her hands as if to reassure themselves she was real. Hannah stayed in the bedroom. She did not want to intrude on their joy. She did not belong to it. She had never belonged to it. She sat on the edge of the bed, her packed case beside her, and waited for someone to remember she existed. It was Sarah who came upstairs first. She stood in the bedroom doorway and looked at the young woman sitting on the bed she had shared with her husband for 16 years. Sarah's eyes took in the packed case, the stripped bed, the young face that had been trying so hard to be adequate. She sat down beside Hannah and took her hand. She thanked her. The words were simple and sincere. She thanked Hannah for caring for her children, for keeping her house, for standing in the impossible gap her absence had created. She said she could not imagine what these months had been like. She said she was sorry for the pain Hannah must be feeling. Hannah could not speak. She could only nod, tears streaming down her face, while this woman who had returned from the dead held her hand and offered grace she did not feel she deserved. Jacob came upstairs later. He stood in the doorway and looked at Hannah with an expression she could not read. He told her the elders would need to meet, that decisions would have to be made about what was to be done. The marriage had been valid in the eyes of the church. Sarah's return created a complication that had no precedent. Hannah told him she would abide by whatever the elders decided. She was too tired to fight for something she had never wanted in the first place. Jacob opened his mouth as if to say something more, then closed it. He nodded once and went back downstairs. The elders met the following evening. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Hannah sat in the kitchen while the men talked in the living room, their voices a low murmur through the closed door. Sarah sat with her, the two women sharing a silence that was not quite comfortable but not entirely hostile either. Sarah asked about the children, about how they had been during her absence. Hannah told her the truth. They had grieved. They had struggled. They had been brave in ways that broke her heart to witness. Sarah listened and nodded, and occasionally wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. When the elders finally emerged, Bishop Miller delivered their decision. The marriage between Jacob and Hannah had been entered into in good faith, believing Sarah to be deceased. That belief had been reasonable. The marriage was valid, but Sarah's return changed everything. The church could not sanction a man having 2 wives. The marriage to Hannah would be annulled. She would be free to return to her parents' home or to remain in the community as a single woman. Her reputation would not be damaged. She had done nothing wrong. She had performed her duties faithfully. The community would support her in whatever path she chose. Hannah received this news with a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief that she was free from a marriage she had never chosen. Grief for something she could not quite name. She nodded her acceptance and went upstairs to finish packing. She had already written to her parents. They would come for her in the morning. That night Hannah could not sleep. She sat on the porch in the darkness, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill. The stars were bright overhead, indifferent to the dramas playing out beneath them. The screen door opened and Martha came out. She sat down on the step beside Hannah, not quite touching. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Martha spoke. She said she was sorry for how she had treated Hannah. She said she had been so angry about her mother dying that she had taken it out on the person who was trying to help. She said she knew it was not fair and not right, and she wanted Hannah to know that she was grateful, even if she had never shown it. Hannah put her arm around Martha's shoulders. Martha did not pull away. They sat like that until the moon rose high and the cold drove them inside. In the morning, a hired driver brought Hannah's parents to the farm. Her mother embraced her without words. Her father loaded her case into the car. The entire Yoder family gathered on the porch to see her off. Sarah stood at the front, her arm linked through Jacob's. The children clustered around her. Katie held up a small drawing she had made, a picture of the farmhouse with all of them standing in front of it, Hannah included. Hannah knelt to accept it and pressed it carefully into her bag. Joseph, who had never let her hold him, approached and wrapped his small arms around her neck for one brief, fierce moment. Then he ran back to his mother. Eli shook her hand formally, but his eyes were kind. He told her to take care of herself. Martha hugged her. A real hug, full of everything they had never been able to say to each other. Jacob stepped forward last. He looked at her with something that might have been respect. He thanked her for everything she had done for his family. He said he would pray for her happiness. Hannah looked at this man who had been her husband for 8 months and felt nothing but a weary sort of affection. She wished him well. She wished them all well. Then she got into the car and did not look back as it pulled down the lane. The drive to her parents' house took 2 hours. Hannah watched the familiar landscape roll past, the farms and fields and white church steeples of her childhood. She had left this world as a girl married to a stranger. She was returning as a woman who had survived something difficult and discovered she was stronger than she knew. She did not know what would come next. She did not know if she would marry again or remain single or find some other path entirely. But for the first time in 8 months, the future felt like something that belonged to her. Her parents' house appeared at the end of a long lane, white and familiar and unchanged. Her mother helped her carry her case inside. Her old bedroom was exactly as she had left it. She sat on the bed and looked out the window at the fields she had known since childhood. She placed her hand on her stomach, a gesture that had become habit. She thought about the child growing there, the child she had not yet told anyone about, the child that belonged to Jacob Yoder and to her and to this complicated tangle of duty and grief and unexpected grace. She did not know what she would do. She did not know what the community would say. But she knew with a certainty that surprised her that she would find her way through. She had done it before. She would do it again. Outside, the sun was setting over the fields. The sky was streaked with gold and pink and deepening purple. Hannah watched the light fade and thought about the Yoder family gathered around their table, reunited and whole. She thought about Sarah's gentle hands and Martha's fierce embrace and Joseph's small arms around her neck. She thought about Jacob's solemn face and Eli's kind eyes. She had gone to them as a replacement for a dead woman, and found instead a family that had taught her what she was capable of surviving. She had lost the life she was forced into and gained back the life she was meant to live. She opened her case and took out Katie's drawing. She smoothed it flat on her bedside table. Then she went downstairs to help her mother with supper, carrying her secret quietly, ready to face whatever morning would bring. The following Sunday, Hannah sat in her parents' pew at the district church service. The familiar hymns and prayers washed over her. She kept her eyes forward, aware of the curious glances from families who had not seen her since her marriage. Bishop Miller was not present. He was preaching at another district. But the local minister spoke of God's mysterious ways, of doors closing and windows opening, and Hannah felt the words settle into her heart like seeds planted in dark soil. After the service, several women approached her. Some offered tentative words of welcome. Others simply squeezed her hand and moved on. An elderly widow named Esther Baylor, no relation but a longtime friend of her mother, took Hannah aside. She told Hannah that she had been married at 18 to a man 30 years her senior. She had buried him after 20 years and raised 5 children alone. She told Hannah that God does not waste any sorrow, that every trial prepares a woman for something she cannot yet see. Hannah listened to this woman's story and felt less alone than she had in months. As autumn deepened into winter, Hannah settled into the quiet rhythms of her parents' home. She helped her mother with the canning and the sewing. She wrote letters to Ruth Stoltzfus, who responded with news of the district and gentle inquiries after Hannah's well-being. She did not write to the Yoders, though she thought of them often. She wondered how Sarah was recovering her strength. She wondered if Martha still used the sewing technique she had taught her. She wondered if Joseph ever asked about the woman who had straightened his suspenders. She carried these wonderings silently, like smooth stones in her apron pocket. One morning, as the first snow dusted the fields, Hannah stood at her bedroom window and watched the flakes settle on the bare branches. Her hand rested on the gentle curve of her stomach, now just beginning to show beneath her apron. She thought about the spring that would come after the winter, about the child who would arrive with the planting season. She did not know what the future held. She did not know if she would raise this child alone or if God would send her another partner. But she knew, as surely as she knew the sound of her own heartbeat, that she was no longer the frightened girl who had measured coffee into a stranger's percolator. She was a woman who had loved and lost and been set free. She was a woman who had been broken and was slowly, carefully becoming whole.